The Valori were dying. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly and painfully across 300 worlds. Their sun had begun its death spiral 2 centuries ago, and now the radiation poisoned everything it touched. Children were born sick. Crops withered in fields that had fed billions for 10,000 years. The great cities of the Valori Empire, once shining examples of galactic civilization, now stood as monuments to despair. Ambassador Kareth stood before the Galactic Council, his forearms raised in the ancient gesture of supplication. His voice cracked as he spoke to the gathered representatives of 900 species. "We beg you," he said. "We have served this council faithfully for 8,000 years. We have contributed to every great project. We have defended borders that were not our own. We have given our sons and daughters to war as the protected species, who now sit in judgment of us. Please, help us evacuate our people. Help us find new worlds. We will pay any price. We will sign any treaty. We will become servants if we must. Just save our children." The council chamber fell silent. Kareth could see the delegates shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The Zardian ambassador, a being of crystalline light, was the first to speak. "The Valori situation is unfortunate," he said, his voice like breaking glass. "However, the resources required for such an evacuation would strain the economies of all member species. The Council cannot authorize such an expenditure. We could share the burden," Kareth pleaded. "Each species could take a small number. We are only 4 billion now. Spread across 900 worlds, that is less than 5 million per species. Surely that is manageable." The Dranathi delegate, a massive insectoid creature, made a clicking sound that translated as disgust. "The Valori genome is incompatible with most atmospheric conditions in the galaxy. Housing your people would require specialized facilities. The cost is prohibitive. Then we will build the facilities ourselves," Kareth said. "Give us land, give us permission. We will do the work, and compete with native populations for resources." The Morthian ambassador shook her reptilian head. "Our people would never accept such an arrangement. There would be violence, civil unrest. The political cost is too high." One by one, they spoke. One by one, they offered excuses. The Valori had once been powerful, but power fades. The Valori had once been wealthy, but their wealth had been spent trying to save themselves. The Valori had once had allies, but allies remember favors only when it is convenient. After 7 hours of debate, the council voted. 873 species voted against providing aid. 12 abstained. 15 voted in favor, but they were small species with no resources to offer. Kareth walked out of the council chamber with his head held high because his people expected dignity even in death. But inside, something had broken. 8,000 years of loyalty, of service, of sacrifice, and when his people needed help, the galaxy had turned its back. He returned to the Valori embassy and began drafting the message that would tell his people there was no hope. 3 days later, a ship arrived in orbit around the Valori homeworld. It was small and ugly, a patchwork of metals and composites that should not have held together in vacuum. Its design was crude, its technology primitive by galactic standards. But it came bearing a message. "This is Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth vessel Meridian. We have heard of your situation. We would like to talk." The humans had been in space for barely 200 years. They had discovered faster than light travel only 50 years ago. They were considered one of the youngest and least significant species in the galaxy. Their application for council membership was still pending, lost somewhere in bureaucratic limbo where it would likely remain for another century. Kareth agreed to meet with this human captain, more out of curiosity than hope. What could such a primitive species possibly offer? Captain Chun was smaller than Kareth had expected. Humans were soft creatures, without claws or scales or natural armor. Their eyes were strange, showing too much emotion. When she walked into his office, She did not bow or perform any formal gesture of greeting. Instead, she simply extended one of her 2 hands toward him. "Ambassador Kareth," she said, "I'm sorry we took so long to get here. We only heard about your situation last week." Kareth studied the extended hand, confused. One of his aides leaned in and whispered that this was a human greeting ritual, an offering of peaceful intent. He reached out with one of his own hands and grasped hers carefully. "You came from Earth?" he asked. "That is 18 light years away. You made that journey in 3 days? Our ships aren't fast," Chan admitted. "We pushed the engines pretty hard. Burned out one of our secondary reactors. But when we heard what was happening, we couldn't just sit and do nothing." "You burned out your reactor?" Kareth was stunned. "To come here? You do not even know us." Chan smiled, and Kareth found the expression oddly comforting. "We know enough. We know that good people are suffering. We know that the galaxy has turned its back on you. That's enough for us. Captain, I appreciate the gesture, but what can your species do? You are young. You have limited resources. The Council has made its decision. The great powers of the galaxy have abandoned us." Chun reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device. She placed it on Kareth's desk and activated it. A holographic map appeared, showing a region of space that Kareth did not recognize. "This is the territory of the Human Confederacy," she said. 12 colonies, 60 billion people. Not much compared to the great empires. But here's the thing, Ambassador. We talked to our people, every single colony, and we asked them one question. Are you willing to make room? Make room? For the Valori. Every colony voted yes. Every single one. We can take 200 million of your people immediately. We can build habitation facilities for another billion within a year. It won't be comfortable. It won't be easy. But it will be safe. Kareth stared at the holographic map, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Why? He finally managed. Why would you do this? We have nothing to offer you. We are a dying species with no power, no wealth, no influence. Chun leaned forward, and her strange human eyes met his. Ambassador, my grandmother came from a place called Vietnam. Long before we had spaceflight, there were wars on our world. Terrible wars. People had to flee their homes. They crowded on the boats, hoping to find safety somewhere else. Many of them died. But some survived because strangers on distant shores decided to help them. They didn't ask what the refugees could offer. They just saw people in need and opened their doors. She paused, and Kareth saw something in her expression that he had not seen in any of the council delegates. He saw genuine compassion. My grandmother was one of those refugees, Chung continued. She survived because a stranger showed her kindness. She raised my mother to remember that kindness, and my mother raised me the same way. That's why we're here, Ambassador. Because we remember what it means to need help. And we remember that the measure of a people is not how they treat the powerful, but how they treat the powerless. Kareth was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. The Council will not approve this. They will say you are violating protocols. They will impose sanctions. They will make your species suffer for helping us. Let them try, Chine said simply. We're not asking permission. We're telling you that humanity stands with the Valori. Whatever comes next, we face it together. The next months were chaos. Human ships arrived in increasing numbers, small and crude and utterly determined. They carried supplies, building materials, medical equipment. Human engineers worked alongside Valori scientists, learning to adapt human habitation systems to Valori needs. Human doctors studied Valori biology, developing treatments for the radiation sickness that plagued the population. Human farmers brought seeds from Earth, experimenting with crops that might grow in Valori soil. It was not enough. Nothing could be enough. But it was something. And for a people who had been told they were not worth saving, something meant everything. The Galactic Council did impose sanctions. Trade with human colonies was restricted. Human applications for council membership were officially rejected. Several species threatened military action if humans continued their unauthorized migration project. The humans did not stop. Captain Chun became Admiral Chun, coordinating an evacuation fleet that grew larger every month. Ships came not just from official human governments, but from private organizations, religious groups, independent colonies that had no formal connection to the Confederacy. When the human military could not spare vessels, civilian ships volunteered. Cargo freighters were converted to passenger transports. Mining vessels carried construction equipment. A luxury cruise liner donated by a wealthy businessman became a floating hospital. 3 years after Chun first arrived on the Valori homeworld, 1 billion Valori had been evacuated. They lived in hastily constructed habitats, worked in unfamiliar industries, ate strange food that their bodies struggled to digest. But they lived. The children who were born in those new homes were healthy. They grew up speaking both Valori and English. They played games with human children. They celebrated human holidays and taught their human friends Valori traditions. Two species that had nothing in common except their shared vulnerability slowly became one community. The Galactic Council watched with growing unease. A young species barely out of their infancy had done what the great civilizations could not. Not because they had superior technology, not because they had vast resources, not because they had political power. They had done it because they chose to. They had looked at a dying people and seen not a burden, but a family they had not yet met. Other species began to whisper. If the humans could do this, what did that say about those who had refused? What did it say about the Council's claim to moral authority? What did it say about the values that supposedly held galactic civilization together? 50 years later, the Valori were no longer dying. Their population had stabilized at 2 billion, spread across human colonies and a handful of new worlds that had been terraformed through human-Valori cooperation. They were still healing, still rebuilding, still mourning what they had lost. But they had a future. Ambassador Kurath, now old and gray, stood before the new Galactic Assembly. It was not the same council that had abandoned his people. That council had collapsed under the weight of its own hypocrisy. The new assembly included humans as founding members, and the Valori sat beside them as equals. We stand here today, Kurath said, because one species refused to accept that some lives are worth less than others. The galaxy forsook us. Humanity alone extended its hand. Let us never forget that lesson. Let us build a civilization worthy of that compassion. Admiral Chun, now 90 years old, and watching the speech from her home on Earth, smiled at the screen. Her grandmother's legacy had traveled further than either of them could have imagined. Across the stars, in habitats and colonies and ships, Valori and human children were playing together, completely unaware of how remarkable their friendship was. That was exactly how it should be.